The people who vanish from your life never disappear. They keep living in the gaps you don't notice. This isn't about closure or revenge or who texted first. It's about what really happens after someone walks away, inside the quiet machinery of memory, identity, and desire. Because what fades on the surface often intensifies underneath, reshaping both people long after words have stopped. By the end of this film, you'll see why separation isn't the opposite of connection. It's the stage where attraction, ego, and control reveal what they truly were all along. You're listening to PsycheLure, where emotion is dissected like art, and silence says what language cannot. So breathe. Let's begin. Section 1. The mirror. When we lose someone, the first thing we search for isn't them. It's our reflection in them. You check their page, their last message, the timestamp. Not to reconnect, but to measure who you were when they still look back at you. The mind doesn't crave people, it craves confirmation. Every scroll through their memories is a way of asking, was I ever really seen? That's why longing feels so addictive. It mirrors the brain's hunger for validation more than love itself. Psychologists call it object constancy, our attempt to keep emotional continuity even when reality has moved on. But attraction complicates it. Because the image we loved wasn't stable, it was curated, shaped, and polished to fit the story we needed to believe. When that mirror breaks, the fragments stay sharp. You can't stop touching them, even when they cut. The pain you feel isn't about losing them. It's about losing the version of yourself that only existed in their gaze. Section 2. The illusion of freedom. When someone walks away, they call it freedom. They post sunlight, travel, laughter, as if liberation has a soundtrack. But freedom, at first, is just noise without meaning. You see, the human mind mistakes novelty for growth. Neuroscience shows that the same dopamine surge that fuels infatuation also appears in early independence, the rush of the unknown. It feels like power, but it's only chemical applause for escaping discomfort. Soon the silence lengthens. The likes stop echoing, and what once looked like liberation begins to taste like absence with good lighting. In philosophy, this is the paradox of the false release. We run from one cage, not realizing we carried the bars with us, the fears, the stories, the unfinished self we were trying to escape. Real freedom doesn't feel like celebration. It feels like quiet responsibility, the kind that arrives when no one is watching, and you finally have to face the truth. You didn't want freedom. You wanted to be understood. Section 3. The phases of disconnection. Every separation unfolds in phases, not because time heals, but because denial needs stages to dissolve. At first comes the expansion, new faces, new noise, new proof that life goes on. But every novelty is a borrowed distraction. The mind collects experiences like patches, trying to cover a wound it refuses to examine. Weeks pass. The conversations repeat. You laugh, but the laughter doesn't reach your body. It's choreography, the performance of someone who believes movement equals progress. Then comes the recalibration, the realization that the same sunset, the same dinner, the same night out, all taste slightly duller than they did when someone else was there to witness them. Because meaning isn't built by what we see, it's built by who saw it with us. That's when the energy shifts. Freedom turns into fatigue, distraction becomes noise, and you start to sense that what you escaped wasn't the person, it was the mirror of yourself you couldn't bear to keep looking at. Section 4. The first crack. There's always a moment when the illusion breaks, quietly, almost politely. It might be a date, a new face across a table, someone saying all the right things, and yet something inside doesn't respond. The words land, but nothing moves. What ends relationships isn't always betrayal or anger. Sometimes it's the stillness that arrives when the mind can no longer pretend. The laughter sounds the same, but there's no pulse behind it. You nod, you smile, you perform connection, but your body remembers the pattern that once felt real, and this one doesn't fit. This is the first crack, the dissonance between image and instinct, where your logic says, "I'm fine," but your nervous system whispers, "This isn't home." Psychologists call it affective mismatch, when the emotional language of one bond cannot be translated by another. And in that gap, loneliness doesn't announce itself. It just waits, patient, invisible, certain, knowing it will be the only thing left when the performance ends. Section 5, the rationalization loop. When truth becomes unbearable, the mind doesn't seek clarity. It seeks a story that hurts less. So it begins the loop. You tell yourself it was meant to happen. You repeat that you've grown, that you've learned, the endings are lessons. You post the quotes, smile in the photos, add a caption about peace. But peace isn't performance. It's the silence you stop trying to prove. Inside, comparison begins to whisper. You measure, without meaning to, the new faces, the conversations, the validation. You try to convince yourself that quantity can substitute for depth, but it never does. This is how rationalization becomes a drug, a constant effort to frame pain as progress. And each time you do, the story gets thinner. The emotional oxygen runs out. Eventually, the loop collapses under its own weight, because pretending you're healed is heavier than admitting you're not. And when the exhaustion arrives, it doesn't look like sadness. It looks like stillness, the moment you stop defending the lie that you've moved on. Section 6, the market reality. After the silence settles, the world presents its new economy of affection. It's not love anymore, it's a marketplace. Every interaction feels like an exchange rate. Attention for attention, validation for distraction. You enter it thinking you're free to choose. But what you're really choosing from is an algorithm built to keep you wanting, not finding. Profiles blur, conversations repeat, and everyone seems halfway elsewhere. Desire becomes a search engine, endlessly scrolling for what no one can supply. Emotional certainty. Social science calls this perceived abundance, the illusion that more options mean more fulfillment. But choice doesn't create connection, it dilutes it. When everyone is replaceable, no one becomes real. The irony is brutal. In chasing validation, people lose value. In seeking freedom, they dissolve meaning. Eventually, the game exposes itself. You realize the market rewards novelty, not honesty. That the more you try to appear whole, the more invisible you become. And somewhere in that crowded silence, the heart begins to understand. It wasn't attention you wanted, it was recognition. Section 7, the reckoning. At some point, maybe a year later, maybe sooner, the noise collapses. The nights stretch longer, not because of loneliness, but because there's nothing left to distract the mind from itself. This is the reckoning. The moment when the performance ends and what remains is you, unfiltered, unvalidated, unobserved. The body begins to notice what the ego ignored. The constant fatigue, the shallow breath, the ache that isn't physical. Psychologists describe it as emotional depletion, the price of living in contradiction for too long. All the borrowed philosophies, self-love, detachment, moving on, feel paper thin now. Because wisdom memorized is not wisdom lived. And the lesson that was meant to liberate you has quietly become another story you use to avoid yourself. Then, one evening, without warning, it happens. You don't miss the person anymore. You miss the part of you that believed love could fix what discipline never addressed. That's the truth the silence was hiding. Healing isn't a return to who you were. It's the slow, reluctant burial of who you pretended to be. Section 8. The phantom connection. Even after the body adjusts, the mind keeps its ghosts. You hear a song, a phrase, a scent, and for a fraction of a second they return. Not as memory, but as sensation. A neural echo that reminds you of a world that once existed only between two nervous systems. This is the phantom connection, an after-image of intimacy that survives its source. It's not obsession and it's not love. It's the nervous system replaying an unfinished rhythm, asking, "Are you still there?" Modern neuroscience calls it emotional imprinting, a pattern the brain repeats until it learns that the signal will no longer be answered. But learning takes time, and emotion doesn't obey logic. So you continue to feel someone who isn't present, like a melody still vibrating in the room after the musician has gone. And in a strange way, that echo becomes a form of gratitude, because it proves something real once lived there, even if it couldn't stay. Section 9. The Law of Replacement. Every culture invents ways to replace what it loses. New partners, new philosophies, new distractions, all promising renewal. But the truth is mathematical. What is rarely integrated cannot be easily replaced. We confuse repetition with healing. We date people who resemble the last one, only to learn that patterns aren't accidents. They're habits of perception. The same story, just different eyes. Behavioral scientists call it emotional substitution, when the mind installs a placeholder to avoid the withdrawal of meaning. It's efficient but not transformative, because until you understand why you desired what you did, every new connection becomes another repetition of the same unresolved need. And so the cycle continues. Affection, illusion, disappointment, each one convincing you that something out there must complete what you keep abandoning in here. The law is cruel but fair. Nothing truly new can enter until the lesson of the old has been digested. Most people don't move on. They just accumulate unlearned endings. And over time, that weight makes every beginning feel heavier. Section 10. The Collapse of Standards. When the cycle repeats enough times, the mind starts to bargain with itself. You lower the bar, not because you've become wiser, but because exhaustion begins to feel like acceptance. It happens quietly. The things you once called boundaries start sounding like arrogance. The patience you once had for depth becomes inconvenient. And little by little, the language of connection changes meaning. You tell yourself you're being open-minded, that you don't need intensity, just someone kind. But kindness without resonance feels like diet emotion, safe but flavorless. And soon the absence of chaos starts to look like peace, even when it's just emptiness wearing calm's clothing. Philosophers call this the erosion of standards through adaptation, when the psyche, tired of waiting for what it truly wants, decides to want less. It's not weakness, it's survival. But it carries a cost, because every time you say, "This is enough," when you know it's not, a small part of your self-respect dies quietly in the background. And the next time love knocks, you won't open the door, not because you're afraid, but because you've forgotten what it's supposed to feel like. Section 11. The body keeps score. Long after the mind claims recovery, the body tells the truth. It stores what words refuse to process. The tension behind the ribs, the sleeplessness, the quiet ache that shows up when you finally stop pretending you're fine. Biology doesn't lie. The same stress hormones that surge during heartbreak never fully reset if closure never happened. Your appetite shifts, your skin dulls, your breath shortens. It's not just sadness, it's physiology reacting to emotional malnutrition. Neuroscientists call it somatic residue, the way emotional pain embeds itself in physical form. And the remedy isn't distraction, it's integration, movement, breath, presence, not to escape the memory, but to let the body relearn safety without it. Because the body doesn't grieve romance, it grieves unresolved tension. Every touch, every pause, every heartbeat that once synchronized with another has to be retuned to its own rhythm again. This is why real healing looks so ordinary. Sleep returning, meals tasting right again, breath arriving without effort. That's not forgetting. That's the body remembering how to live without waiting for someone else to breathe first. Section 12. The mirror returns. Eventually, life brings symmetry, not through fate, but through awareness. You see them again, perhaps online, perhaps by accident, and what once ignited the body now barely stirs a pulse. That moment isn't triumph, it's completion, because it reveals what healing actually is, not the absence of emotion, but the absence of charge. You can observe without reacting, remember without relapsing. Meanwhile, the other side of the story unfolds quietly. The one who left begins to feel the delay, the slow recognition that detachment wasn't freedom, only postponement. They scroll through the same digital ghosts, searching for the same confirmation you once did. Except now, the mirror reflects differently. You've changed shape, and they no longer fit. That's the unspoken justice of growth. It doesn't announce itself, it simply rearranges gravity. What once pulled you under now orbits around you, trying to understand how peace could look so steady. And in that stillness, you realize something rare. The point of pain was never to punish, it was to refine. Section 13. The paradox close. Every ending, if lived honestly, becomes a kind of mirror. Not one that shows who hurt whom, but one that reveals what each of you worshipped. One person chased freedom. The other searched for meaning. Neither realized they were the same pursuit in disguise. We keep thinking love is about union, but the deeper truth is that love is the experiment through which the self discovers its own shape. We fall for reflections that challenge our stability, not the ones that soothe it. And that's why the people who wound us most deeply are often the ones who expose the boundaries of who we thought we were. In the end, attraction isn't about beauty, or power, or even chemistry. It's about recognition, the feeling of meeting an unfinished part of ourselves in another body. And when that lesson is learned, the spell breaks. So, if you ever wonder why they left, or why it had to end this way, perhaps it wasn't punishment. Perhaps it was the only way the story could teach you who you've become. The people we lose don't vanish. They dissolve into the wisdom that built us. And what remains, when the noise fades and the ego quiets, isn't heartbreak, it's consciousness. When everything has been said, what's left is silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of understanding. Some people spend their lives trying to rebuild what was lost. Others finally see that loss was the architect of who they are. You can keep chasing what left, or you can let the space it carved inside you become wisdom. Peace doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly, the first morning you wake up, and realize you no longer need the story to feel whole. That's where the real power lives, not in control, or revenge, or even closure, but in the discipline of stillness. The ability to stay with what hurts until it no longer defines you. If this film stayed with you, let it echo for a while before you move on, because the calm you feel right now isn't the end of a story. It's the beginning of awareness. You've been listening to PsycheLure, where emotion becomes insight and silence finally speaks.